Okay, hey guys. So Coach Logan here, and we're gonna be taking a look at the games from today's quads. Now, I'm a little bit new with the Zoom live streaming on YouTube, so bear with me if there's any technical difficulties. But hopefully, we can cover some interesting chess. So let's. I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay, so let's just give me one moment. Okay, so hopefully we can all see this now. So here we are in the Octagon. And okay, so let's take a look. Let's just go through this game by game. This first one, we've got Octagon 1p6 versus Octagon 1p1. So that's going to be Kyle and Jude. So I'm going to look into it. Okay, so let's see. All right, so let's go back to the opening here. Hopefully we can get some good opening analysis. So playing white is 1p6. That would be Jude. Okay, so this started with what looks like a London here. So I'm going to just see this. Okay, so d4, knight f6. Okay, yeah, so it was a London, and it's sort of become kind of like a stonewall. So basically in these types of openings, white is really vying for the e5 square. That's why he has both his f pawn and his d pawn controlling it. And the goal of conquering a square like that is to land a knight on there, as Jude has done. Now, black, conversely, has brought his knight to the e4 square. So there's kind of like a weird symmetry going on in this position. But I probably slightly like white here because, for instance, this light squared bishop, I think for white harmonizes better with his pawns. It kind of shoots through the pawns, whereas black's is bumping into this light squared pawn. Likewise, I think Jude here with his pawn already on f4 could potentially try to create some sort of kingside play. Like there's ideas maybe of lifting the rook at some point with rook f3 and rook to h3 over here. Or for instance, or queen to h5 at some point. So an interesting game. We'll check back into that and see what happens. So let's go back home here. Let's check into some of these other games. Okay, so we've got, that was one of them. Let's take a look at this round. So this is Octagon 1p5 versus 1p4. That would be Silas Smith and Jonathan Hankin. Okay, so playing white here is Silas Smith from Hunter, and Jonathan Hankin from Dalton is playing black. So, okay, the opening we had in this looked like, for some reason it's not letting me toggle the opening moves. But okay, so the opening we had just from looking at it was d4, knight f6, c4, knight c6, knight c3, e5, d5. Okay, so it's become some sort of King's Indian-like position. Only in those types of positions, black usually has his bishop on g7. Usually he's fianchettoed it. Here, black's managed to bring it outside the pawn chain, which it's a little bit non-standard, so it's tough to say right away how that's going to impact it. My hunch, though, is that that's probably an interesting diagonal for this bishop to be on, because typically black's plans in these involve playing like f5, trying to move this pawn to f5, f4, get pawns on g5 and g4, and make a kingside attack. With the bishop out on this diagonal, it's also aimed at white's king. If the bishop were on g7, it's much more passive, so it's less able to help out in that regard. So, I could see this being useful. It's an interesting game. White's plans in these King's Indian position is to try to get through c5 and break through on the queen side. Typically, white tends to be a little bit faster with his plans in these types of positions. But black's attack involves attacking on the side where white's king is. So, in that regard, black's attack, if black lands a punch, it's going to knock out white's king, which wins the game. So it's these types of positions tend to be very, very interesting. I'm curious what will happen as we check back in on this one. So let's go back to some of the other games. Okay, so we have Octagon 1p8 versus 1p2. Let me just check in on who that is. Okay, so 1P8 is Darren Reese, and 1P2 is Aston Roberts. Okay, two very strong players. So let's take a look at this. So 1P2. Okay, so 1P2, which would be the person playing black, is Aston, and 1P8 is Darren playing white. So just take a look. The opening looks like it was a Sicilian, some sort of E6 Sicilian, so a con, and I guess Darren playing white has opted for a type of bind position where he puts pawns on C4 and E4. Now, those of you who caught the Shankland Sitting with Shankland live stream on ICN's YouTube channel this past Wednesday, remember that he said that positions where white can get both E4 and C4 against the Sicilian tend to be quite good for white. Because white is controlling the breaks on black playing D5 or B5, which are two of like the primary ways that black can open up the position in the Sicilian. Now, it is important that white is able to keep a firm hold on that, because otherwise black's position could be quite good. But in the meantime, in this position, I'm not seeing a way for black to get it very easily. So black just played queen B6 here. So it looks like he's putting some pressure on B2. My hunch, I still think I kind of like white in this position. I think that just something like queen to D2 will keep that pawn defended and sort of keep the bind going on the position. That would also defend this loose bishop on E3 and open up possibilities of some point of a knight moving for a discovered attack on the queen. So yeah, I mean, the critical test in this for black is if they can break the position open with either B5 or D5. If they can't do that, it's gonna be a long game for him. Okay, and let's take a look at the last game. So this would be 1P3 versus 1P7. That's Caleb Landsman and Hema Vikas. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So 1P7 is Hema. He or she is playing black, and 1P3 is Caleb, who's playing white. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This looks like it was another, okay, now it's letting me scroll through it, which is great. Okay, so this was another London, it looks like. Yeah, this was a London. I think an important move from black here, which was that after white played knight C3, there's the possibility of them playing E4 next. So I think it is very important that black now plays D5, which is what black did. That makes it harder for white to play E4. Now white can continue, but I think if they can't get the E4 break in, that's a big accomplishment for black. So E3, bishop to G7, H4. So white's playing very directly for a kingside attack. Black played A6. Okay, maybe they're looking to expand on the queen side with B5. Knight to C6. I'm a little bit skeptical of the knight here. I'm wondering what it's doing. If it's not going to help you break with E5, then I don't really understand it. I think, okay, let's see. So A3, knight to H5. All right, so that's bothering this bishop, but I think it can just tuck. Okay, or they defend it. Knight to E2, knight takes, E6, queen to E2. I gotta say, I think black having traded off white's dark squared bishop is a big accomplishment for black. That means that this bishop on G7 can sit a lot more confidently there. There's not gonna be any bishop H6 ideas removing it. If that's the case, I think that helps black a lot. If black can then manage to open up some of these dark squares with either an E5 or a C5 break at some point, that's gonna be quite good for him. So castles. Knight takes D4. Okay, so we're getting a tactical idea right away, which is that this knight on F4 is loose. Well, it's defended by this pawn, but if it takes this knight, then the queen just captures the knight with check. I don't think white can really try any desperados here because his queen is being attacked. So this looks like very good play from black. Knight takes D4, check. Yeah, black's just up in material. Pretty much. Although I think this bishop takes D4 was maybe a little bit unnecessarily greedy. You're already up a pawn. I think it's time to just consolidate and get castled. There's some pressure along the E file, so I think if you get castled, that just defends the pawn. And then you're just playing a winning position from there. I don't think white's H file pressure is too critical because they don't have a dark squared bishop to remove this sort of castle guard here. Now after this, it's anybody's position. Knight takes d5 is hitting your queen. Okay, queen e5. Okay, so black really wants a queen trade, which makes sense. All right, so a very sharp position out the gate here. Again, I think, you know, one thing I really stress with my students is after winning material, you know, prioritize simplification. Okay, don't, we're not looking to, what is it? We're not looking to just win more and more pawns. We're looking to get a position where we are, you know, better without too much counterplay. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other games. Let's just pop in on this. Okay. So what other games do we have here? Okay, I think actually, wait, there might be, I think another tournament might have started. So there's the Octagon Swiss going on, so we can take a look at that too. If it will let me. Okay, hold on, wait, something's up. Let me stop the share. Let's go back into this. Sorry guys, just bear with me. As I mentioned, I'm still learning the in and outs of Zoom live streaming, so, okay. So I'll share my screen again. Okay, so hopefully we can see this again. All right, so now I'm in the Octagon Swiss. Let's pull up one of these games. Let me just see if I have the player codes for these guys. Okay, so so let's pull up this game. And this is SP2 playing white and SP5 playing black. So that would be white is Arhan Javeri and black is Nathan Payton. Two very strong players. Nathan's from PS 41 and Arhan is a 59 kid. So this is an interesting game. So so Nathan's playing black here. So we get a perk. Okay, so Arhan is playing it kind of classically. One thing I wonder about the bishop on c4 is if it's vulnerable to center fork trick ideas, like knight takes e4 at some point with d5 to follow. That's why sometimes in these positions I like just bishop on e2 and then a4 to try to restrict black's ideas of playing like c6 and b5 or a6 and b5. But okay, bishop c4, obviously that's an active square. So let's see, castles. Yep, and then we get a center fork trick, of course. So Arhan is taking the pawn on f7, so we're not losing a pawn. But still, I feel like giving up that light squared bishop is a help for black. I think he doesn't, you know, black's getting the bishop pair now. His kingside safety is a little bit compromised, but I don't know how bad that really is. I think he's given himself greater activity for his rook, and white might miss the light squared bishop if, say, like a bishop g4 comes into play. In fact, that's what happened next. Okay, so bishop g4, knight e to g5, which attacks the rook and defends this knight, which makes some sense. But still, I already feel like black has accomplished something out of this. If nothing else, just getting the bishop pair is an accomplishment. h3 from white. Okay, black traded, which I feel like white getting rid of black's light square bishop is a help for white. I'm wondering here if he could have just played, I mean, I don't know, it looks kind of weird, but if he just goes something like bishop f5, yeah, that temporarily blocks the rook, but it's not like white's knight is spectacular out here. White doesn't really have too much of a kingside attack going yet, and you know, something like h6, and it might be a little bit awkward to find a square for this knight. In general in chess, when you have two knights like this, where they're stepping over each other, we call one of the knights the superfluous knight, which means like extra and unnecessary. And it's not a good thing when you have knights just clunking into each other. They like to harmonize. And I feel like one thing that a lot of players do when they're developing is they'll take one of those knights, which really helps the person who had knights like that, because now we basically traded off a redundant knight, a knight that was just extra and unnecessary. And we traded off for a pretty good black piece, the light squared bishop. All of that said, I think this game is roughly even, especially after the e5 break. This still looks just about even to me. Queen d5 check, okay. This knight's hopping in. Okay, so, all right, let's see. 4. Okay, so yeah, white's making a play to come in with f7. All right, so that could cause some problems for black. I think, yeah, maybe this e5 break might have been premature. Yeah. Well, we'll check back into that game later. So let's go into some of the other ones. Okay, so then we've got Octagon SP7 and SP3. Okay, so hang on here. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me just look up who that is. So, okay, so SP7 is Tanuj from Burning Tree Elementary in Maryland. Wow, we got a player from Maryland checking in. And then playing black is SP3, which is Christian Garcia from, I'm not sure the school. The school code is WESS, but a strong player, somebody in the 1400s. So let's check in on this game. So we had what looks like a Caracon. Okay, so I actually, give me a second to have water. I actually did a video series on the Caracon from the white side where I recommended the move knight to c3 here with the 2 knight system. But of course, d4 is a good move, and this is the main line. This is the advanced variation. And so black now plays c5 quickly, which is sort of like playing this a little bit with some French ideas, except for by not playing e6, we've kept the possibility open of developing this bishop outside the pawn chain. So we had d takes c5, which is a line, knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop f4. Okay, e6. Basically, I think if black can win back the pawns, then black's going to have a decent position. So let's just see here. So yeah, this looks like black was immediately able to win back on c5. Like white wasn't able to get in like a3 and b4 and try to hold on to the pawn. So I think black's position should be pretty decent here. I don't imagine black having too many difficulties. Takes, okay. Okay, so yeah, if we jump into the main position here, yeah, it looks like black is, well, actually, I mean, we're even in material. Black's activity looks good. This bishop is on a long diagonal, this bishop on f6, this rook just checked the king. This rook that's on h8 can jump into play, as it just did. So I think black's activity looks pretty good. I mean, in theory, white's outside past a pawn could pose some dangers, but it's blocked right now, and I just think white's pieces are pretty uncoordinated. I mean, black's threats are coming fast and hard. He's threatening to take on c2. In some situations, he might be playing e5 and e4. Yeah, this looks pretty good for black. So let's check in on some other games. Let's go back to the Octagon 1. Let's see what's going on in these. All right, let's jump back in this first game, which again, I think this was Jude, and Jude was playing white, and playing black, I think, was Kyle. Yeah, Kyle Lantzman. So yeah, so we can take a look at the opening here. So this was a London. Jude has gotten very good at the London, I must say. I think, I think the London is sort of a sideline in that it's not as common as like the Queen's Gambit or just generally playing d4 and c4. But I would say of all of the sidelines that there are, the London's probably one of the most respected ones in that it offers white, a system where there's flexibility to try different plans, to play on different sides of the board, depending on the position, to mix kind of dynamics with strategy. So it's a pretty respected opening especially as far as sidelines go. I know Magnus has played it a few times successfully. So yeah, and so Jude is, I think, okay, this is kind of where we were. That said, I mean, black's position looks solid here. Black has looking now to evict this knight with f6. This knight might have to come back to f3. I think this position is pretty close. I'd say the only factor that still makes me like white slightly better is the quality of the bishops. White's bishop just harmonizes a little bit better with his central pawns in that it's the opposite color of them. Black's bishop is bumping into his d pawn. Will that be enough for a win? I don't know, but it looks pretty close in this game. So let's check in on, let's see what else we've got. All right, here, let me just check that. I just want to check 1 second that the, well, let's jump in this game. Okay, so actually I wanted to check 1 second just that the live stream was going. Yeah, okay, so it's, looks like we're good here. All right, I'm just checking if there's any comment. I see Russ in the chat. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go back to Octagon 1P5 here. So this is, forgive me, I have to keep reminding myself the codes for these guys. So 1P5, the person playing white is Silas Smith from Hunter, and Jonathan Henkin is playing black from Dalton. So yeah, we mentioned the opening this. It was kind of like a King's Indian type position, but with a key difference in that black was able to get his bishop on this diagonal rather than fianchetto it, which I think gives him some interesting possibilities. Now, last we checked in this game, just want to jump back here. So last we checked, all right, they're moving kind of quickly now, so it keeps jumping away from the screen that I've got. But I think we jumped in after white had played knight a4, hitting the bishop. Black retreated it again. White is bringing over his pieces. So this is a good example of what I mean. White does tend to be a little bit faster in these positions. White has really finished his development and gotten, looking like he's going to get c5 and successfully. But that doesn't always tell the full story. So sorry, they keep moving. Sorry about that. Guys, you got 49 minutes and 59 minutes. Take your time, guys. Okay. If only so that I can commentate. Okay. Oh, so it looks like we had a tactic here. So this is a good example of, you might have all the strategy in the world, but if you're not keeping an eye out for tactics, it can all go in the trash, right? So white is doing generally the right things, but the problem is he has this loose knight on a4, and it looks like black was able to find a tactic against that. So after rook f to c1, which is a good move strategically, black was able to take advantage by capturing on b4, and now this knight is subject to a discovered attack from the bishop moving away. Black finds bishop takes f2. Queen takes and then grabs this. So black did steal a pawn out of that. However, that doesn't necessarily mean the game's over. White does have a lot more space on the queen side. So, you know, pushing c5 can still lead to interesting play, which is what he did. Rook to c3. Okay, moved his king off. One plan I think white has been kind of slow with in this is a lot of times in these King's Indian positions, this knight pivots from d2 to c4 to bring more pressure on this d6 pawn. However, I'm not sure what that would totally accomplish here because black is defending that with his knight on e8. Yeah, I think the extra pawn's going to matter. I think black stealing that f2 pawn could be critical in this game. That's a pretty healthy extra pawn. Queen c2. So white's offering a queen trade. Queen trade would reduce black's chances to mate white, but it would also amplify the advantage of being up a pawn. So yeah, I think I like black is, again, this is Jonathan Henkin from Dalton. I think I like black's position here. All right, let's go to another game. So 1P8. This is Darren versus Aston Roberts. So last we checked in this game, yeah, so it was a Maroczy. Oh, so I mentioned one thing in the opening. Before it wasn't letting me toggle the moves, but now I can. White was able to get e4 and c4, which is known as like a Maroczy bind, named after this Hungarian player who was the one who kind of pioneered this idea. But basically with pawns on e4 and c4, you control black's two major pawn breaks of b5 and d5. And if they can't get either of those in, they're going to feel like it's hard to come up with a plan. So they developed around that. I like the way white's playing this. A quick f5. So this is quite aggressive. Knight a4. All right, so they met queen b6 with knight a4, which is interesting. I was thinking of playing queen d2, but knight a4 looks interesting too. That kicks the queen. Queen to c7. So black could argue that by playing queen b6 and white playing knight a4 and then going queen c7, maybe they drove white's knight away from the action. Whereas if black had just played queen c7 directly, well, I guess he did earlier, but I think that's something to be said for black's position. So yeah, white ended up just moving the knight back. That's why I was really thinking, sorry if I keep going back and forth, but that's why I was really thinking of just meeting queen b6 with queen d2. Unless there's a tactic I'm missing or something, that seemed to be more consistent with white's play. It would defend this bishop, it would defend the pawn, it would connect the rooks. Looked a little bit more natural to me. Anyways, after this, we had e takes f5. That move I don't know about. That's going to weaken the d5 square. It does open the e file, which gives black some dynamic chances with these loose bishops here. White took. Yeah, now black plays rook e8, which hits this loose bishop. This is why I would really like if the queen were already on d2. I think white's pieces feel a little bit loose to me. They're calling for some defense. White spends a tempo on queen d2 now, but now I think there's tactics. So yeah, black's sacked here, which is quite an interesting, and I think at least on the surface of it, looks like a reasonable exchange sacrifice, because if we think about this, all of white's pawns are on light squares, and he has kind of a lot of whenever your opponent has pawns on primarily one color, that means the other color is necessarily weaker. So by sacrificing this rook for the bishop, black is really weakening white's dark squares. Notice black is retaining his dark squared bishop, and I think there's possibilities for issues with white with this d4 pawn. This d4 knight. Like black played queen b6, but I'm curious here if he could get away with something like knight takes g4. The idea being if like knight takes g4, let's say bishop takes g4, then black can play bishop takes d4 himself, which would pin the queen to the king. I gotta say that looks pretty good. I don't see much recourse for white in that. Yeah, I think I like knight takes g4 here. I mean, black played queen b6, which does keep up pressure, but I feel like white has more chances to withstand this. Now maybe they could play knight back to c2 and defend their queen and just get some pieces off of this diagonal. And maybe slide a rook over. This knight is still an issue, so that's why I was leaning towards knight to c2. But yeah, I really think here after queen takes e3, the goal is get your bishop to d4 where it's defended. And I think a move like knight takes g4 just might do that. Unless I'm missing something. I mean, maybe white has a resource there, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, what am I talking about? They have queen e8. Okay, of course, yeah. Need my coffee this morning. But yeah, white has queen e8. So I take that back. So maybe knight takes g4 is not advisable. But then even something here, like just trying to get a rook over to e8, like some sort of bishop d7 and just try to get a rook e8 feels like it could bring a lot of pressure on the file too. I mean, if you play bishop d7, you're then threatening knight takes g4. I think we just want to get pieces into this. Okay, so queen b6, rook a to d1. It's a very interesting game. White is up a winning amount of material, but the some of the weaknesses on the dark squares and some of these loose pieces is going to make this dynamically quite interesting. We'll have to keep checking back in on this one. Okay, so let's go to another one. So this is 1p3 versus 1p7. So let's take a look. That is playing white again is Caleb, and playing black is Hema. So this game progressed again from another type of, it's kind of like a London/Veresov system with this bishop f4, knight c3. I remember thinking here that black was doing quite well after this knight takes f4 tactic, or sorry, this knight takes d4 tactic. Although then I thought they should have castled. Instead, they played bishop takes d4, allowing this knight takes d5, which made the game very double-edged. They did manage to get a queen trade, which helps their cause. Although rook e1, white's down a pawn, but has completed development, and black's still caught in the center. Okay, black played e takes d5. See, my instinct would be to play bishop to d6 and get the loose piece off of there. White could play knight f6, but okay, you play king e7. I don't think it's the end of the world. but instead black took, rook takes with check, bishop e6, okay. C4, so white's going to try to rip open lines before black is developed. White's probably going to do some sort of bishop desperado here. Bishop f5 check. Okay, so white's down a pawn. Yeah, this is better for black. White's just down a pawn, I think. King c2, rook. Okay, black played rook to f8. My instinct would be to go rook to d8. If we trade rooks, we have a winning advantage with the extra pawn. If they move their rook, we can get our king into the action. So I would just go rook d8 and challenge the file. Rook f8, f3. Let's see here. They keep making moves, which is why it scrolls to the current position. But so rook f8, f3, then rook f4, targeting the h4 pawn. This looks pretty good too. Yeah, now you can activate the king. I think black is just winning here. I don't love king c6. I don't love blocking this pawn majority. I think I'd go king e6 and try to get these pawns mobilized. Or king e7 to keep the rook from invading. But I want to get c5 and b5 and c4 and try to get these pawns going on the queen side where black has their majority. Yeah, where you want to play, and especially in the end game, the goal is to make a pass pawn, or at least the primary initial goal is make a pass pawn where you have a pawn majority. Black has a pawn majority on the queen side, but they haven't made much progress in making a pass pawn, and I think that's allowed white to get their king active. You know, now white has counterplay. White can do stuff like king coming into f5, king coming into g6, taking this h6 pawn, running the h pawn. Yeah, this is what happens if you wait too long in chess to start your active ideas, is your opponent can activate themselves. So, okay, let's take a look at another game. Let's jump into the other, let's go back into the Swiss. So we're going to jump back into this. I just want to check again that the live stream's working. By the way, guys, I'll keep checking in on the chat. So if you have things you want to, like if you have a game you want me to check out, feel free to mention it. If you have a question about one of the games, feel free to mention it. There's a little bit of a delay on the broadcast. So, forgive me if I don't get to it right away, but I'll try to keep checking in on that. So anyways, okay, so let's take a look at this again. So Octagon SP1, this was, I'll have to remind myself, but SP1, that was Sophia is playing white versus SP3. That would be Christian Garcia. So I think this is a new game, actually. Okay, so we had another Caro-Kann. They're moving quickly, which makes it hard. So e4, d5. Okay, so she went for this exchange variation, which is also quite interesting. Black played the move. Basically, I think if white can... Okay, they're moving kind of quickly, so it's hard for me to really get into it. But in the opening here, in this type of position... all right, wow, they're moving really quickly. Let me wait till they reach a position where they're going to stop making moves so quickly, because then maybe I'll have a little bit of chance to do analysis. So white's threatening mate on h7. I assume black is going to do something like play g6. And I think white's just down a rook here. I don't think her attack is strong enough. But if we go back to the opening, when white played c3, this type of pawn structure is quite interesting, where you see 4 on the queen side and 3 on the king side from white, and black has 2 on the queen side and 5 on the king side, or on the king side / center. This type of pawn structure, it's known as the Carlsbad pawn structure. Comes up a lot in the Queen's Gambit positions, like Queen's Gambit decline type positions. It comes up sometimes in the Caro-Kann. Sometimes you get it in the London. And it may seem like it's kind of dry if you don't have much experience, but it's actually quite an interesting pawn structure. White has this semi-open e-file and can try to make attacks on the king side, kind of like they're doing in the game. Black will often either try to expand in the center with this is kind of like a dream at this point, but to play like at some point like an f6 and e5 idea, or more likely is to use these queenside pawns to get in like b5 and b4 and try to weaken white's queen side. So let's see what happened in this game. As I said, they've played kind of quickly, so haven't had much of a chance to really analyze. And it looks like white just ended up losing a pawn here on b3, which that'll do it. I think just a move like knight to b3 would have been good. This would have blocked the isolated pawn too. Instead, they ended up hanging a pawn. They both have over an hour, so I think they're maybe maybe they're moving a little bit quickly. I think is the issue. Or if we're hanging pieces, I think maybe we're moving a little bit quickly. But okay, we'll go to another game. All right, let's check out SP8 and SP2 in the Swiss. This one. Okay, wait, I'm not getting notations on this one. So maybe, did this one just start? Maybe somebody's away from their board right now. So let's check this one. SP11. Okay, I don't actually have the person for that one, but I've got SP7 is Tanuj again from Maryland. Hey, Tanuj. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but we appreciate anybody who plays from, who's joining us from Maryland. We like expanding chess to all over the world, so that's great. So this was looks like a Spanish, and black played bishop c5, d6, knight f6. Okay, so kind of like an Archangel's defense. Usually black has included a6 in that. So this is sort of like a Berlin with bishop c5. My hunch is that white can just go d4 quite quickly here. I think that's probably white's most aggressive and most combative option. They're ahead. They've castled already, which makes the idea of opening the center look favorable for them. But yeah, we're still in the opening phase, so we'll see what white comes up with. All right, let's go back. Let's go back to the Octagon. So okay, so games here. All right, so let's check back in on. I think this was Jude's game. Yeah, Jude and Kyle. So yeah, all right. So after f6, we had the knight. So let's. Oh, is it not letting me toggle again for some reason? Yeah, I don't know on this one. Try it again. Let's try it one more time. Yeah, it's not letting me toggle again on this one, but okay, I'll just do my best to explain. We had f6, which kicked the knight away from e5. Looks like Jude brought his knight back to g4. Black played knight f5. Jude did do the rook lift that I mentioned earlier, rook f3 to h3. So yeah, white is cooking up some threats on h7. Black could play something like h6, but that's going to weaken the light squares. They could play something like f5, which would shut down this bishop. But yeah, so that's what they did. This is probably the most solid option, but it really does call into question this light squared bishop. I think like if black could magically trade light squared bishops right here, like if you could just imagine him just picking up the bishop and putting it on white's bishop and taking both of them off the board, I think black's position would be totally solid and everything would be fine. I still feel like this problem with the light squared bishop is an issue. Also, Jude could have ideas of playing like king h1, like tucking this king in the corner, bringing this rook over to g1, and then like trying to blast through with g4. So I'm not sure that we've seen the end of Jude's kingside attacking chances here. I think there still could be something there. Let's check in on another game. So, okay, so let's take a look at 1p5 and 1p4. I think this is Jonathan. Sorry, guys, I have to keep reminding myself. Jonathan playing black from Dalton and Silas playing white. So last I looked at it, it looked like black was just kind of solidly up a pawn. We had, yeah, so we've had a lot of moves since then. Again, for some reason, it's not letting me toggle again, which I'd like to be able to click on the move, but oh well. So I'll just jump in the position from here. So yeah, black's up a pawn, which is a big advantage in the end game, and it's a big advantage at any stage of the game, but especially so in the end game. White's sort of counting on counterplay with this passed b pawn. I don't know if it's going to be enough. I think that if black can sort of mobilize Debbie and Eddie here, this past D and E pawns, then I just think black is just up a pawn, and it's going to matter. 2 connected passed pawns are better than 1 passed pawn, and the further they go up the board, the more it's just going to drag white's position in with them. So yeah, this I think black has pretty good winning chances in this. Okay, let's check in on another game. Let me check in on the chat in case anybody. Nope, I haven't seen anyone. That's fine. Let me just write in the chat. Let's see. All right, so let's go back. So games. Okay, here. So we had 1p6, we checked on that. Let's check on 1p8 and 1p2. So this was, again, Darren playing white and Aston playing black. So this was that very interesting game with the, what do you call it? The exchange sacrifice from black. After queen b6, we had rook a to d1, bishop d7, knight a4, queen a5. So yeah, so white is still up in exchange, but I would not say that they've totally consolidated yet, because there's still this pressure from black. Black is threatening this knight. Once this knight moves up, we had something. Hold on, the screen. I lost the screen on a second. Okay. Oh, now it lets me toggle again. Fantastic. Okay. So yeah, we had queen to b6 from black, rook a to d1, bishop d7. So black did end up playing the idea I was talking about with bishop d7, trying to get rook e8 in. Knight a4, queen a5. Yeah, so once white moves this knight again, I mean, rook e8 is coming. It's going to be painful for the queen to have to move. It's a very sharp position. I'd say black's dark squared bishop in the current position is quite a good piece. I don't think... Yes, white is up in exchange, and if this game just simplifies to an endgame, white will win. But right now, it doesn't feel like we're anywhere near a simplification. It feels like we still got a lot of chess left to be played. I think white could face issues on d4 with this knight. So yeah, this is an interesting one. Aston's an exciting player. He's not afraid to sacrifice. Okay, so white plays knight takes c6, which I think is a good decision, just getting rid of that loose knight. That does activate this bishop, but we at least have a light squared bishop that could challenge black. Yeah, so I think that was a helpful trade for white. I think this goes a long way towards white's consolidation. Knight takes c6 means you no longer have to worry about this knight hanging with like a bishop takes d4 at the right moment. Yeah, I think that's definitely a big help to white. Now I think, okay, he played knight to b6. My instinct would have just been to go knight back to c3 and keep everything solid. I think, I'm not actually sure what this knight is going to do here. And maybe he can try to bring it into d5 at some point to swap more pieces. That might be the idea. But yeah, rook e8 comes now. This queen has to stay in contact with this knight, so he's got to play something like queen f2. Knight e4 could be coming. Yeah, I really don't love this knight to b6. I think it should have just gone to c3 and covered the e4 square. One of the themes in some of these games that we're seeing is when you're ahead in material, you should be looking to simplify. You should be looking not necessarily to go for more material or go for more activity, unless it directly helps or unless there's like good reason to. But the priority should be simplification. And simplification means, is my king safe? Am I fully developed and harmonized? And then can we start trading? And I just feel like white's harmony is not there yet. There's too many loose pieces, too many active black pieces. Because we have this knight on b6 now, it's loose. On c3, it would be not loose. It would be sturdy, and it would defend e4, which is important because this knight's going to hop into there at some point. Yeah, so this could backfire. I think knight c3 would have been strong. I think now, these black minor pieces are going to swarm like bees. Okay, let's take a look at, let's see what else we got here. Let's jump back into the Swiss. So, Okay, Octagon Swiss games. Okay, so we've got this one here, SP1. Okay, that one's over, so we'll get back to the tournament. We'll jump into SP11 and 7. So I don't remember exactly who was in this one. I know Tanuj was playing, I think, one of the sides of this one. But yeah, so white went for D4, which is great. Black takes, white takes. This looks quite good for white. White is grabbing the center with tempo. Bishop B6, I'm skeptical of because this knight's going to come under pressure with D5. I think we need the resource A6 in there at some point. Bishop B4 also looks weird, though. I don't think that really solves it because white could play something like Queen A4, which threatens to take on C6 and take the bishop, or just take the bishop directly. But after Bishop B6, just D5 looks like it's winning a piece. Yeah, white's just up a piece here. And black has a couple of, well, black has a pawn for it, but that's not enough. White is better. Oh, excuse me. Okay, let's go back into the, let's see, I want to check out the Jude game again. We'll jump back into the Octagon. Oh, actually, let me just see if anybody's in the, hang on. Okay, we'll go back into the Octagon. And we'll just check if anybody's in the chat. Okay, no, okay, so, all right. All right, so where are we in this game? So this one, okay, so Jude has gone for a version of what I was saying. He played G4 just right away. But I might have prepared this first. I don't know if we really had to rush it like this. I think, so I've been reading this, working through this series of books by Jacob Aagaard. I mentioned this in one of the videos I released recently. And one of the books is on attack and defense. And one of the ideas when you attack is you want to include every piece in the attack. It sounds kind of basic, but a lot of times what happens is people sense that they might have an attack and they don't want to waste time, which is an understandable impulse. But I think here, in a position where the center is reasonably closed, you really want to take the time to include everything. So I think I would have gone for something like king to h1 and like rook to g1 and then g4. Now that does, knight e4 might be coming at some point, but still, g4 directly, it's more direct, but we're less immediately able to put pressure on the g file. Now, I guess the counterpoint to that is we're trying to put more pressure on h7 right away. But we'll see. So knight e4. Hang on. Sorry, guys. Checking. Got a message. Okay, just checking. Okay, so knight e4 from black. We had queen e2, g6. Okay, so g takes f5, e takes f5. Again, I'm not sure that we needed to do that. Okay, so now bishop takes e4. Okay. Yeah. I think black can now just take with the d pawn, and then this knight is kind of questionable. It can move around a little bit, but I'm not sure exactly to where. Like, it's not also so easy to get to a good square like g5. You'd have to move the rook, then knight h3, then knight g5. But black might be able to bring counterplay in the center at that point and try for something like, potentially taking one of these pawns, bringing rooks and queens to the open c file and trying to invade. Okay, so black took with the f pawn, which is interesting. Okay, I feel like that lets white's knight jump into it a little bit faster. Like, now they can try for knight to g4 and knight to e5. They still have this loose rook on h3, which makes it not so easy to do that. Yeah, my instinct was to take with the d pawn so that we don't have this backwards pawn here at any point, and that we could just try to start ripping open lines, and so that we increase the scope of this light squared bishop. But it's hard to say. This looks playable too. All right, so let's check in on see what other games we got here. 1P5 and 1P4. This was I think Jonathan and Silas again, and yeah, so there was some stuff going on there with the knight on. We had the trade of knights. I don't know that I love that. Hold on, wait. We had knight to b3, knight to, there was a knight c4, knight b6, and black took, which does allow this pawn some more space to run. I'm really wondering if black had just played something like d5. Well, I guess they could still play that. So here, okay, so here they went rook c8. I guess if d5, then the king invades with c5. But still, I feel like these passed pawns are faster. Or at least they're more potent because they're connected. So knight b6. Let's see. If we had played d5 check, white can play king c5. Then I guess you can play e4. If they play king c6, you could get d4 in. You know, even if at some point you'll have to give the rook for this pawn, if you have connected passed pawns up on the third rank, they're really dangerous. Even there, they're worth more than a rook. Instead, let's see, we had rook c8, which is reasonable too, trying to body check the king away. Yeah, I just feel like we should be getting in d5 and e4 and d4 and creating threats with these connected passed pawns. I feel like this. No, I feel like it's a bad sign if we're going backwards with the king. The king should really be helping these pawns. Basically, I think like the overarching plan for black should be get these two pawns further down the board with the assistance of the king. White will definitely try to make play with this passed b pawn, but even if at the end of that you have to give up the rook for this pawn, like make white take as long as possible with this pawn. If you have to sack the rook for it, sorry, just so people don't get confused. Something like this, back in this position, if we could get these passed pawns down to the third rank with the help of our king, even if we have to give the rook for this pawn, these connected passed pawns are going to be worth more than the rook. By instead trying to bring our king over here, now white is able to use his king to bully these pawns, and now all of a sudden I like white. White has this, black, no, I'm not so sure, because black can take this, and then he has a passed pawn faster than white does. I think here, yeah, if I go back, yeah, okay, white took, black took. Okay, white's trying to make play here, but yeah, okay, I think black's extra pawn still matters the most here. Yeah, no, this should be a winning king and pawn. Yeah, no, white's just lost here. Black takes. They're too slow. I think they're too slow on the king's side here. If they play king g6, black plays e4. If they take on g7, e5, or sorry, d4, and this pawn just runs. Okay, see, I get a notification. 1 second, guys. Just check in case it's anybody messaging for the chat. Okay. Okay, no, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, no, here, well, we'll get an interesting queen versus advanced pawn situation where white has a pawn that is close to queening, but if black has good technique here, I think they should be able to pull this through. They need to try to force white's king in front of the pawn and then march their king over. So I think every chance you get as black here, you want to bring your king closer. That move I'm not so sure about because, yeah, it's going to allow white to make more progress. I would have just played king c6. Okay, so white's threatening the pawn on h5. Black is threatening the pawn on h5. White should probably move it with like h6. If white plays g7, then just queen takes h5 is elementary. White should know the technique for winning that endgame. So I think white's got to play h6. Sorry here. It's getting a little bit stuffy in here. Just gonna take off my sweater. Okay. let's see here. So h6. Oh, this is an interesting endgame here. If black were to pin this pawn now, maybe with queen to f5, then white I think would have to step in front with king g7. But then their h pawn becomes a threat to queen. So it's now all of a sudden it's not so clear. Maybe this is a technical endgame and I just don't know it, which would not be the first time. I'm working on my endgames, but they're not, not grandmaster level. So okay, so black is trying to pin this pawn. White plays king to g7. Whew. And yeah, that pawn looks like it's gonna play h7 next. Yeah. I mean, at any moment here, black can sort of bail out with a series of checks, but it's frustrating when you can't win these when you have your queen first and they're not really in position to queen yet. Okay, so white should play probably king back to h7. Yeah, definitely not g7 hanging the h6 pawn, so king back h7. Yeah, honestly, it's hard to see how black wins this. Now, I think it's very easy for black to draw, but it's hard to actually pull a win out of this. All right, let's quickly check back on some of the other games. At some point soon, I'll jump off the stream just because it's going for an hour. But let's see if we got anything else interesting. Let's check back in the Jude game. Okay, so we had. Oh, now it's doing the thing where it won't let me toggle again. Okay, but we had f takes e4, king h1, c takes d4, c takes d4, queen e7. Yeah, I'd say we've seen white's attack kind of fizzle a bit on the king side, somewhat, but still, black needs to solve this bishop, which I think with so many of these central pawns on white squares, that still requires some work. Now, you could try to bring it around this pawn chain at some point, but it's not so easy. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see a solution for this bishop right now. Yeah, yeah, it's a close position, but I still edge towards white here. I feel like this knight has more potential to be annoying than this bishop. Okay, let's see what else is going on. Oh, it's still this endgame. Okay. King h7, yeah. Well, okay, we'll just lastly check into the Swiss. And then we'll sign out. So we got this game going on. This was the, okay, now white's just up in this one, correct? Yeah, white won a piece. Actually, white's up 2 pieces now. So yeah, white should be doing pretty well here. I think white's gonna pull this one out. Okay, we'll check back into the Octagon. Just, I'm very curious about this end game. Sorry, wrong one. Yeah, I think this is going to be hard for black to win this. I think if you try to make progress, it's just like the only way black can win is if they can manage to get their king over here, but it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to bring the king in the vicinity of these pawns and their king. white is at any point, 2 moves away from queening. And typically the technique against one of these pawns would be to force their king to step in front of it. But with 2 pawns, it's certainly not easy to do. I'm not as confident in my endgame knowledge yet to say that this is not a win, but it definitely looks very hard, especially practically speaking. I feel like this is going to be a draw. All right, guys. So I'm going to sign out for now, but this was really fun. I hope to be back for more of these. Hopefully, I'll have I'll be better equipped at the technical aspect of Zoom chat, so that I can get on it right away. But this was fun. So, all right, guys. It's Coach Logan. I'm just signing out here. So we'll let's end the live stream.